The 19th of December, 1944. The Ardennes Forest, Belgium. 4:30 in the morning. The temperature has not risen above 10 degrees Fahrenheit in 6 days. The kind of cold that does not feel like cold at first. It feels like pressure. Like the air itself pressing inward through fabric and skin and muscle, searching for the bone. Private First Class Raymond Hoback of the 35th Infantry Division cannot feel his feet. He hasn't felt them since Tuesday. He sits at the bottom of a foxhole that is half filled with frozen mud and compressed snow, and he presses his hands against his thighs because his gloves, his single pair of standard-issue wool gloves, disintegrated 3 nights ago when he crawled through a stream to reach his position. He is wearing summer boots, leather-soled, canvas-lined, completely inadequate for what is happening around him. He was issued those boots in September, in France, when the war was supposed to be over by Christmas. Nobody told the German army. Somewhere to the east, through the black wall of fir trees, he can hear the low mechanical groan of Panzer engines. The Germans have punched a hole 45 miles wide and 60 miles deep into the Allied line. 3 German armies, 250,000 men, 600 tanks are driving west through this forest in what Hitler has named his last great offensive. The Americans call it what it looks like from the ground: the bulge. But Raymond Hoback is not thinking about the bulge. He is thinking about his feet. He is thinking about whether he will lose them. He has watched 2 men from his squad carried to the rear already this week. Not shot, not wounded by shrapnel, evacuated because their feet turned black. He pulls his knees to his chest and wraps both arms around his legs. He counts his heartbeats to stay awake. 40, 41, 42. 3 foxholes to his left. Sergeant Morris Kenner is already unconscious. Nobody comes. This is the winter that the United States Army's own after-action reports would later describe as a systemic, preventable catastrophe, a failure of supply, of planning, of basic command accountability, that cost more men than the German offensive itself in those first brutal weeks. Frostbite and Trenchfoot would claim over 15,000 non-combat casualties in the Third Army alone. 15,000 men removed from the line not by enemy fire, but by cold and by the negligence of officers who had the requisitions sitting on their desks and did nothing. General George S. Patton knew about it, and what he did when he found out is the reason we are here. To understand why those men were sitting in foxholes in summer boots in the middle of the worst European winter in 40 years, you have to go back to the autumn of 1944, back to the logistical decisions made when the war still felt like it was winning itself. After the breakout from Normandy in late July and August of 1944, the Allied advance across France moved with a speed that shocked everyone, including the planners. Patton's Third Army covered ground so fast that supply lines designed for a slow, methodical advance stretched and snapped under the pressure. The Red Ball Express, that famous convoy system of 6,000 trucks running 24 hours a day, was delivering fuel and ammunition. But winter clothing, cold-weather boots, wool-lined coats, sleeping bags rated for sub-zero temperatures, those items were sitting in depots in England and Normandy, waiting for a distribution chain that had been overwhelmed and reorganized 3 times since June. The official planning assumption, as late as October 1944, was that the war would end before the onset of true winter. Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force Chef had made a bureaucratic wager against December. They lost. The requisitions for winter gear had been filed. That is the critical, infuriating fact that emerges from the Third Army's own quartermaster records. The requests existed. They were submitted in October, clearly and specifically. Winter boots in sizes ranging from 7 to 13, wool blanket liners, heavy field jackets, chemical heat packets. The paperwork moved upward through the chain. At several points in that chain, it stopped. A quartermaster colonel whose name appears in Third Army logistics reports filed between November and January approved a partial shipment to other sectors and delayed the Third Army's allocation, citing transportation bottlenecks on the Meuse River crossings. Whether this decision was made out of incompetence, bureaucratic indifference, or a genuine operational triage, it doesn't matter in terms of its consequence. The consequence was this. When the Germans attacked on December 16th and American soldiers dove into hastily dug foxholes in the frozen ground of Belgium and Luxembourg, thousands of them were wearing the same boots they'd worn crossing the Seine in August. The Third Army's chief surgeon, Colonel Thomas Whelan, had flagged the problem in a medical status report dated December 4, 12 days before the German offensive began. His assessment was direct. He noted that cold weather injury rates were already climbing, and that without immediate resupply of appropriate footwear, the medical situation would become, in his words, operationally significant within 30 days. Wieland's report went up the chain. It was acknowledged. Nothing happened. Then the Germans came through the Ardennes, and everything happened at once. Within 48 hours of the initial German assault on December 16th, 3 American divisions had been shattered. The 106th Infantry Division lost 2 entire regiments to encirclement, approximately 8,000 men captured in a single engagement at the Schnee-Eifel. The 28th Infantry Division, already battered from Hürtgen Forest, took the full weight of the German 5th Panzer Army and was torn apart. The town of Bastogne, a critical road junction, was surrounded. The 101st Airborne Division was inside it, holding on with everything it had, and Patton was watching all of it from his 3rd Army headquarters in Nancy, France. Here is what is almost impossible to believe, unless you understand the man. Patton had anticipated this. Not the specific attack. No one predicted the scale of what the Germans were about to do, but Patton, ever paranoid about his northern flank, had quietly instructed his staff 3 days before the offensive to begin preliminary planning for a northward reorientation of the entire 3rd Army. He had 3 contingency plans sitting in his headquarters safe when the call came from Eisenhower's Chief of Staff on December 18th. At a conference in Verdun on December 19th, the same morning, Raymond Hoback was counting his heartbeats in that frozen foxhole. Eisenhower asked his generals how long it would take to swing a relief force north toward Bastogne. Other commanders spoke in terms of weeks. Patton said 3 days. The room went quiet. Eisenhower looked at him. "Don't be fatuous, George," Patton said. "I'm not being fatuous, sir. I have 3 divisions ready to move. I've already given the order." He had. Before the meeting started, he had called his headquarters and issued a code word, a single word that activated the contingency plan. His army was already turning north before anyone in that room had finished their coffee. But here is what the history books rarely capture: what gets lost beneath the legend of the relief of Bastogne, beneath the famous prayer for clear weather and the dramatic arrival of the 4th Armored Division on December 26th, while the strategic maneuver was happening. While the tanks and infantry were grinding north through snow and ice, Patton was simultaneously dealing with a crisis inside his own lines that had nothing to do with the German army. His men were freezing, and somebody in his own command was responsible. In the first week of the Bastogne relief operation, 3rd Army medical stations began reporting non-combat casualty numbers that Patton's Chief of Staff, General Hobart Gay, described in his diary as grotesque. Frostbite cases were arriving at aid stations faster than battle wounds. Men were being pulled from the line with blackened toes, with fingers that couldn't close around a rifle trigger. One regimental surgeon reported that he was treating more cold injuries per day than he had treated bullet wounds in the entire month of November. According to a 3rd Army medical log entry from December 22nd, the division surgeon of the 4th Armored Division noted simply, "Men arriving without adequate footwear. Cases of full trench foot presented on arrival at forward aid stations." Full trench foot, not early stage, full, meaning these men had been suffering for days before anyone pulled them off the line. Patton received a consolidated casualty report on the evening of December 23rd. He read it in his command trailer, standing up, still in his coat. He did not sit down. He read it twice. Then he asked Gay a single question: who signed the last winter supply authorization for 3rd Army's forward divisions? Gay gave him a name. Patton put the report on the table face down and said, "Get him here by morning." The officer arrived at 3rd Army Forward Headquarters the following morning, the 24th of December, 1944, Christmas Eve. The roads were ice. The sky was clear for the first time in a week, the weather break that Patton had prayed for. The break that was allowing his air support to finally hit German columns. It was, by any measure, a morning of forward momentum for the 3rd Army. The logistics officer, a full colonel, walked into the command space expecting a briefing. He had prepared justifications. He had transportation reports, bottleneck assessments, a memorandum about the Meuse River crossing delays. He had paper. He had reasons. Patton was standing at the situation map with his back to the door when the colonel entered. He did not turn around immediately. He let the colonel stand there. 30 seconds, a minute, long enough for the man to understand that something was wrong. When Patton turned, the colonel later recalled, His face was absolutely composed. Not red, not theatrical. Composed in the way that a blade is composed before it moves. Patton asked him, "How many pairs of cold weather boots did Third Army request in October?" The colonel began to answer with context. Patton stopped him. "I didn't ask for context. I asked for the number." The colonel gave him the number. Patton asked, "How many pairs were delivered to forward divisions before December 16th? The colonel hesitated. He referenced his memorandum. Patton waited. The number the colonel gave was less than 30% of the request. Patton looked at him for a long moment. The staff officers in the room, Gay, the G4 logistics chief, 2 aides, none of them moved. The only sound was the distant percussion of artillery somewhere to the north. Patton said, "My men are losing their feet. They are being evacuated from fighting positions because they cannot stand up. I have 15,000 non-combat casualties and the Germans haven't touched them." "You did." He relieved the colonel on the spot. Stripped him of his command authority, ordered him to remain at headquarters pending an Article 32 investigation, and turned back to the map. The entire exchange lasted less than 4 minutes. The colonel walked out of that room no longer a colonel in any functional sense. His career in the United States Army effectively ended in that command trailer on Christmas Eve, 1944. Within 24 hours of that confrontation, Patton issued a command-wide emergency order that cut through every layer of bureaucracy that had allowed the crisis to develop. He ordered all available winter boots, regardless of which unit they had been allocated, to redistributed by priority to frontline infantry. He authorized his quartermaster to pull supplies from rear area support units and push them forward without the standard authorization chain. He contacted the Army Group Level Supply Depot directly, bypassing the normal request process, and demanded immediate priority shipment of cold weather gear to Third Army sectors. He also did something that was, for a general of his rank, almost unheard of. He drove to the front himself. Not for a photo, not for a morale visit. He went to a regimental aid station and walked through the frostbite ward. He looked at the men. He spoke to the division surgeon. He asked specific questions. "What do you need? What did you not receive? Who did you report to?" A corporal in that aid station, a kid from Pennsylvania named Donald Kraber, later wrote in a letter home that Patton walked up to his cot, looked at his bandaged feet, and said, "Son, this should not have happened to you. It won't happen again." Kraber lost 2 toes. He came home in the spring of 1945. He lived to be 87 years old. The emergency resupply effort Patton ordered on December 24th began reaching forward units within 48 hours. By December 28th, the most acute shortages had been addressed. The non-combat casualty rate, which had been accelerating through the first week of the relief operation, began to decline in the final days of December and dropped sharply into January as the cold weather gear reached the men who needed it. The Battle of the Bulge, the German offensive that began with those armored columns grinding through the Ardennes on December 16th, officially ended on the 25th of January 1945. It was the largest battle ever fought by the United States Army in its history. More than 80,000 American soldiers were killed, wounded, or captured. The Third Army's relief of Bastogne, the famous drive north that Patton promised in 3 days and delivered, is remembered as one of the most decisive operational achievements of the entire war. But inside that achievement, inside the legend, there is this: 15,000 men who became casualties not from bullets, but from cold, and from the failure of a system to take care of them, and from the decision of one general to look at that failure directly, find the man responsible, and end his career without hesitation, without bureaucratic delay, on Christmas Eve, in a command trailer, with the guns still going in the distance. The colonel who was relieved was investigated under Article 32 proceedings. The investigation reviewed his decisions regarding the October requisitions and the subsequent distribution choices. The findings, which were administrative rather than criminal, concluded that his decisions reflected poor judgment and inadequate urgency rather than willful negligence. He was not court-martialed. He was reassigned to a rear area administrative post in England and remained there until the war ended. He returned to civilian life in 1945. History does not record him as anything except a footnote in the supply records of the Third Army. Patton himself never referenced the confrontation in his published memoir, War as I Knew It. but Gay's diary, now archived at the U.S. Point Enamasis Army Heritage and Education Center in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, contains a brief entry for the 24th of December, 1944, that reads, "C.G. relieved Colonel. Matter of winter casualties. C.G.'s demeanor. Controlled. Decision. Immediate." The Third Army continued its drive east through January and February of 1945. It crossed the Rhine at Oppenheim on March 22nd, reaching the far bank before Montgomery's much-publicized crossing to the north, a fact Patton relayed to Eisenhower with barely concealed satisfaction. His army raced through Germany, liberated Buchenwald, reached the Czech border, and was within striking distance of Prague when the war in Europe ended on the 8th of May, 1945. George Patton died on the 21st of December, 1945, exactly 1 year and 2 days after he ordered winter boots pushed to the front on Christmas Eve. He died not in combat, not on a battlefield, but from complications following an automobile accident near Mannheim, Germany. He was 60 years old. He is buried at the Luxembourg American Cemetery in Hamm, Luxembourg, among the men of the Third Army he commanded as he requested. Raymond Hoback, the private counting his heartbeats in that frozen foxhole on the morning of December 19th, survived the bulge. He came home to Virginia. He worked at a hardware store for 31 years. He had 4 children and 7 grandchildren. He never talked much about the Ardennes. His daughter, in an interview recorded by the Veterans History Project, said that every December her father would pause just for a moment while setting up the Christmas tree, and she asked him once what he was thinking about. He said, "Cold. Just that. Cold. If someone in your family served in the Second World War, in Korea, in Vietnam, in the Gulf, in any uniform, in any war, leave their name in the comments below. Just their name, or a memory. Something they said once that you never forgot. Something they carried home with them that you didn't understand until you were older. These men and women built the world you're sitting in right now. The least we can do is say their names out loud, in a place where other people can hear them.